set. Mr. Speaker, we recognize developing countries, those countries who are in the middle of socioeconomic development, who needs to satisfy two main priorities in order to sustain that kind of development much, much further. One is that they need to retain their human resources as much as possible. Because the more good human resources they have, the more political and economic drive to strategically push forward the development that they want to seek for is going to be reinforced at the end of the day. But secondly, they need certain critical mass or the basis for them to push for a better working environment and socioeconomic developments to happen. And that's only possible when there are adequate human resources there to be retained despite all the lacking infrastructures and socioeconomic welfare that's been granted to these kind of countries. Because we recognize the problem, the status quo of the developing countries, that because they're lacking in labor rights, in terms of salaries, working environments in general, that these good human resources after graduating their universities have a higher incentive to leave their countries and go to countries who pay you higher salaries, who provide you better working environment, such as the United States or Abu Dhabi, where you can get double the salary that you might be getting in those developing countries like Philippines, Malaysia, and all these developing countries at the end of the day. We think that's a realistic picture that we are providing you here, that we are trying to retain these people as a human resource for us to strategically use, as well as make them a critical mass for us to push forward much further stronger development drive for these developing countries. Just on account of model, let's talk about what kind of model the open government is going to push for. Right after graduation policy, we're going to put these people up to 2 to 3 years to work in a domestic arena, and the government may or may not designate certain jobs or careers that these people would have to work for according to strategic needs of these people. We're going to move on a principle level in terms of why it's principally justified that we want to limit the freedom of these people, either as in freedom to move or freedom of choosing what kind of job they want to pursue. But we think at the end of the day, there are clear third-party harms that justifies these limitations of freedom. And at the end of the day, it's only 2 to 3 years. We think the harms is going to be very marginal at the end of the day, because those harms, even if in the best case scenario the opposition, it's going to be marginal at the end of the day. It's not irrevocable. 2 levels of analysis in terms of potential case. Firstly, why is the government actually justified in terms of limiting the freedom to move, freedom to pursue certain careers at the end of the day? Because we think the very primary justification of these limitations comes from the burden to prove the tangible harm on the general public in developing countries at the end of the day. So in this debate, if opening government succeeds in providing a tangibility of these kind of harms, we think the limitation of these rights are justified. There are 2 level analysis in terms of these harms. One, it's about the brain drain of these skilled workers. Because we see in a lot of developing countries, there are very skilled labor forces such as doctors, teachers, nurses, and engineers, who becomes the basis for all countries' development to happen on the basis of the development. We see in the example of Bangladesh, we see in the example of Malaysia, we see the enormous bulk shift of these people in Philippines, where these people are incentivized to move somewhere else once they attain the special expertise of their own. While their domestic situations require their human resources to be retained and do provide their services to the domestic people in order for the country of the origin to develop, we think there is an incentive for these people to opt out. We think this is a problem because of these several reasons. One is that there becomes a less of the laborers to provide the necessary services that are inevitable for these people to seek for. Meaning, the impact is that because there are less human resources to provide those indispensable services, the price for these services necessarily rises because the number of doctors who can provide you medical services decreases, while the demand stays the same. There's going to be a rise of price happening. We think this is critical in terms of impacting these kind of countries in a very negative way, because note that developing people in developing countries have lacking resources and monetary leisure in their own hands. which limits the fundamental accessibility and affordability of these kind of services, when the very services of what engineers, doctors, and nurses are providing are things that are not something that only luxuries can have, but it's something that every single human being should be granted. But secondly, even if it's not the problem of price, we think there is a decrease in terms of quality of these kind of services provided. Because these kind of good human resources who stay in the domestic region knows that they're the only ones monopolizing these kind of services. Meaning, since the variety of consumer choices is not given in these developing countries, they have an incentive to lower the quality of the services to maximize their profit at the end of it. We think this is clear third-party harm given to the general public at the end of the day, due to the greedy individual interest of these people who oftentimes are very who have accomplished a higher level of education at the end. But second level analysis on the harms, we think when this kind of structure becomes prominent, we become dependent on remittances, meaning the country's economy becomes based on only the inflow of the money coming from the abroad, because people work abroad and send their money back to their country to support their families and whatnot. But before I continue, yes.
Does the policy apply to university graduates from like literature school, like School of Literature, History, and things like that?
It's all those university education that is considered to be privileged in those developing countries at the end. The dependence of remittance is problematic because oftentimes, if we become dependent on it, the economy becomes very vulnerable to one, unregulated inflow of money, which cannot necessarily be regulated by the socio-economic regulation, because oftentimes developing countries lack those policies. But secondly, also there are leaks of revenues in the middle, because there are a lot of loopholes in terms of economic regulations ongoing at the end of the day. But even if we say all those reasons does not fulfill the justification of limiting these, we still think that we having the tangible harms is at the end marginal, like I said in the very first part of the speech. It's only going to be the 2-3 years of service going back to your country, and it's not an irreparable harm that we take away from you eternally. Last thing is talk about the critical mass. Because we think that when there is a want for change in terms of basic structure of developing countries, we need a critical mass who supports the logic and actually telling the story of what's actually the problem in the status quo, who have actually experienced these kind of problems at the end of the day. We think when these people leave the country, all these higher level of educationers leave the country, we think the critical mass decreases, which lessens the political drive and agendas to be pushed much forward at the end of the day. We think developing countries are in dire need of development. And in order to achieve that, we need these kind of people to be attained, and while there is no irrevocable harm done. Extremely practical.
So rest of the viewers, please remain silent while other people is speaking. It's really disturbing both for you yourself and the speaker on the stage, and very disrespectful. So let's welcome the LO to open the case for opposition bank here.
Opening opposition thinks that a person's choice of what kind of life they want to lead should not be influenced by what country they happen to be born in, what country they happen to be living in, or the stage of development of that country. What they characterize as a greedy desire of these individuals is actually like one of the most important choice that forms the way you live, that decides the course of your life for the rest of your life, and they are trivializing this choice that is going to be taken away from these individuals, and they are trying to instrumentalize these people as a tool for the kind of benefit that we don't even know how they're going to achieve inside the country. So, and they also talk about how it's not an irrevocable harm, but it is actually going to take away a lot of opportunity for these people. So firstly, I'm going to talk about that, and secondly, I'm also going to tell you that it is actually better for the development of this country for some people, mostly elites, to leave this country and to serve as a channel to bring more business opportunities for this country and the people inside the country. So firstly, about the choice that's going to be taken away. I said that persons in how they want to live their life should not be decided by the stage of development of the country they happen to live in. And this is especially true when we're talking about a choice of occupation, because your occupation is a large part of your life, right? So firstly, simply because it takes away a lot of time, because you spend so many 50 or 60 years of your life trying to, that is going to be devoted to your job, but also it is related to what you view yourself as, your self-identity and self-actualization. So this is why a lot of people, it's a big deal for them what they want to become in the future. So they think about what they want to become, and if they don't get their dream job, then they're going to be really, really unhappy and not actualized for a long time, right? And also, it also influences the type of people you meet and the type of knowledge you gain, and also your what kind of values you will have in the future. So for example, if you are working as a politician, or if you happen to become a construction worker, you might have very different views as to which kind of politician you want to support, or what kind of social welfare policy you want in your country. And also, most importantly, not most, but it affects your salary, so it affects the quality of life that you are able to pursue. So, like I said, occupation is a large part of your life. That's why it is a huge deal for most people, yes.
But the fact that some people happen to be born in a rich family and really choose occupation imply that they owe fortune to the society and government to some extent. That's why they're paying progressive tax to the state, even in the status quo.
Okay, my partner will answer that. Okay. Okay, so that is why, if these people are forced to work in their home country for 2 years or 3 years, a lot of opportunity is going to be lost simply because they're going to feel very, very in despair, because they cannot, if they wanted to become a professor, if they wanted to pursue a further education, for example, in a country where there is a better educational institution, but they cannot, so they're going to have to lose 3 years working in a very simple kind of job factory, and they think this is not what they were born to do, or it's not what they should be doing. Or for example, if they wanted to become a kind of occupation that only exists in developed countries, for example, I don't know, an investment banker or something, they're very interested in financial stuff, then they cannot do that. Simply, it is very, very disappointing for them, right? So, and they might say that this is only for a short period, but this is a very big period for these kind of people who are pursuing their first career, because in the job market, you're compared with other workers by skill and potential. So this kind of policy, it forcibly takes away 3 years of precious time to further improve their skill in of their ideal occupation in an ideal environment. For example, if you wanted to become an investment banker, you need to work at a bank which has enough money for you to trade and gain more experience. But if you cannot gain that experience, then after 3 years, you're going to be in a very disadvantageous position compared with other people who have that experience, right? So, and also, just gaining 2 or 3 more years, if you are older, then you are already on a bad start in a job market, because for corporations, when they hire people, when they compare potential workers, for them to hire someone who is unexperienced, and for them to have to invest the time and money in you to train you to become a skilled worker, it is something risky and something costly for them. So that is why when these people are equally unskilled, but they are 3 years older, then the company is never going to hire them, because they will not be working for that company for 3 years less. And also, for example, in academia, the kind of experience, job history you have at the point of some kind of age is very important. For example, in academia, you have to write some numbers of paper before you are 25 to be able to, for you to be able to get into kind of like a prestigious institution or a prestigious lab and things like that. And also for lawyers or accountants or any other job, you need to have the appropriate job history or like what kind of job you have done in the past that is appropriate with your age. So especially this is the influence on these people getting their ideal job is huge when considering that they are already in a disadvantageous position in another country where there might be a language barrier or they don't have the human connection or like the social capital to support them to get a good job. So they are adding this one last push to make them into an even more disadvantageous position in another country. So for the development of the country, the PM said this, but like in a very short term, these people, when they succeed in another country, and when the price of things and the value of money is different in another country, like developed country, they see their family and friends who are still poor in their homeland, and they're obviously like the Huaqiao people from China that they in 1960s, they send money, right? So this is like foreign capital that goes into these countries, and without this kind of foreign capital, even if the country forced the population to work like simple jobs, they don't have enough investment, so the efficiency of this labor force is very low. For example, in the factories, they cannot have like enough like good facilities to produce more values, right? So for these countries, especially getting foreign capital is essential in this kind of stage of development. They also have this kind of feeling that they want to help the next generation. So that's why they're going to send these know-how and skills into their homeland. So that's why we think it's even better for them, for some elites to go out of the country first.
Thank you, the opposition, for the speech. Now let's welcome the Deputy Prime Minister to end the case of opening government. Here.
We think it's extremely problematic that opening opposition agrees with a lot of the nature of the problems that we gave here regarding the context of the developing world. They do agree that these people are stuck in dire situations in which the working environments are horrible, in which salary systems are insufficient, in which the legislations are not passing regarding labor rights and standards. However, we think it's problematic coming from opening opposition that when they recognize the severity of these problems, they think the solution to fix the problem is to allow the citizens to conveniently exit the country in order to pursue their self-interest at the end of the day, at the expense of severe and tangible harms that the economy and the society suffer as a result. We think that fundamentally disregards and undermines the nature of the relationships that governments and citizens have in the status quo, in which no liberty and no freedom is absolute to begin with. I'm going to be further elaborating on this particular point in my constructive. But before going on to that, let's deal with two main ideas coming from the opening opposition. Regarding first, to what extent should these freedoms be granted to begin with, especially in the context of the developing world, in which freedoms of individuals are oftentimes undermined or compromised for the benefit of rapid development that saves people out of poverty and starvation. But second, let's talk a little bit more about foreign capital and why we don't think that that's a unique benefit coming from OO. So on the first question, to what extent should these freedoms be granted? We already gave you two layers of of rebuttals on this particular point. On the first point, what you have to understand about the relationship between the government and citizens is that our freedoms, even those that are relevant to our labor and our movement, are not absolute at the end of the day, which is the reason why PM spent substantial amount of time trying to prove to you the tangibility and the severity of the harms that occur as a result of this freedom by individuals. We told you about the severity of the brain drain, what happens to the price levels of psychedelic services and essential services that are no longer provided by skilled laborers like doctors, nurses, and professors that are no longer present in these countries. We also told you about how the economy becomes more volatile, that are dependent on unregulated and untaxed remittances. We think that we already spent a lot of time regarding how these harms are tangible and severe. We think that this particular analysis is extremely important because if we're able to prove the harms, then that serves as justification for the government to limit and curtail the individual rights of these citizens, right? So coming from the opening opposition or the upbench as a whole, they should disprove either the magnitude of these harms or the causality of these harms that are caused by these individuals. I don't think they are going to be able to do that anytime soon. But we told you on the second level that even if we do agree that the freedom of movement and the freedom of labor is something that is so important, we told you at best, this is at best 2 to 3 years, right? Meaning that the harms that are potentially caused are not irreversible or not unmitigable, right? Opt does not prove to you why, moving out of your country to overseas when you're 20 versus 23 is so significantly different, right? We think that it's also important to note that these citizens will be working in their own nation. So the ability to garner professional experiences in the field and the labor force that you are not being compromised, right? So for their argument to be true coming from OO, their premise that the experiences of professionalism and the experiences in your labor force are being compromised. But that's not true, because if you're a nurse, you will be working as a nurse in that developing country of yours. So we think that you're garnering professional experiences that doesn't necessarily prove the harms coming from their side. But second, let's also deal with this idea of foreign capital. We already engaged and preempted this coming from our PM, right? We told that this foreign capital often is delivered back to these developing nations in the form of remittances, which is problematic because oftentimes these are unregulated, untaxed. We think that that means that oftentimes the economy becomes very volatile. We think it's undefensible that 40% of the Philippine economy, for example, is dependent on the job markets of other third-party countries in which the Philippine government has no absolute control over, right? So we think that it's better that we have these citizens stay in these countries and actually internally strengthen and diversify the economy instead of shrinking the economy further. I'm going to integrate the rest of the rebuttals in my actual speech. Coming from my constructive, I'm going to be talking to you about how this provides a unique benefit and value that cannot otherwise be guaranteed. But before that, let me give you another layer of justification. We tell them in the context of developing countries, those who end up being able to attend university-level education can be divided into 2 main categories. One, those that are privileged, that has enough financial resources to be able to afford education at the tertiary level. And second, the poor and low middle class. Why is this characterization important? Because A, if you're privileged and wealthy, then a short limitation of your freedom does not impose massive harms in your sustainability of livelihood to begin with, right? So even if you're not able to earn double the salary overseas in your 2 to 3 years after college, you're still able to sustain a good quality of life based on your privilege and financial resources. But B, for these people who are poor and low middle class, we think that oftentimes they're beneficiaries of public scholarships and state funding that enable their education to begin with, which means that we think it's justifiable for these citizens to give back to the government and for the society for the investment of resources, for the spending of resources that are oftentimes more finite and zero-sum in these developing countries, right? We think that this justification is extremely important in addition to what we provided you thus far. What is the unique benefit that we draw to you on OG? We agree that the working environment and the structures in the developing world are not sufficient, they're not perfect. But we think that the solution to that should not be for citizens to easily and conveniently exit the country in search for self-interest that have tangibility and severity of the harm to the society. We think that for this system in developing countries to be fixed, we need a sizable number of people that remain in the workforce to do the 2 following things. 1, to identify the root sources of the problems. 2, to exert pressure against the government to reform the system that often lacks sufficient data and incentive to try to fix the system to begin with, right? Because if you have a large number of your own citizens leaving that country after that, then there is no social pressure or critical pressure coming from the citizens or coming from the public to try to reform and try to change the system. Any POIs coming from closing room? Okay, cool. So we think that that this pressure and this accurate identification of the problems are absolutely necessary and critical in order for the government to be able to, and also have the incentive to draft better legislation and to try to draft better working standards. We think this is a unique benefit, and this is also the reason why our trade-off becomes so important. We think that the benefit that we take out of today's debate is that in which we're actually able to mechanize actual progress and some form of change in the system that is currently making these people suffer from the very get-go, right? We think that we're able to, we're able to internally strengthen and diversify the economy further. We're able to have drafting of legislation or policies that can improve the system in the long run, right? We think the trade-off that we're willing to make is the short-term loss of certain rights and short-term loss of certain individual rights, which we think that is not even absolute to begin with. So we don't necessarily think that it's such a severe principal harm at the end of the day. So what are the things that we bring to you coming from OG? We told you, one, the principal level justification as to why the tangibility and the severity of the harms given to the economy and society are sufficient of government justification to limit freedoms of individuals that are not absolute and that are not perfect to begin with. But second, we provide you a unique benefit as to why this specific and unique mechanism is necessary to build critical pressure and to build good identification of the problems for any form of change to be present in the status quo. So for all these reasons, we absolutely take this debate home. Thanks.
Thank speech. Now let's welcome Deputy Leader of Opposition to end the opening half debate. Here.
I'm going to prove to you two things in my speech. First of all, we are going to prove to you that regardless of stage of development, individual autonomy is the virtue that government should respect, especially when it comes to jobs that they engage or the place where they live, because these are the things that determine the lives of citizens. Second of all, even if we consider moral duty of individuals coming from that side of the house, how to contribute to the developing nation should be decided autonomously by each individual themselves. And this is at the end of the day, like better way to achieve economic development, social change that they want to achieve on their side of the house. So it's rather their side that tries to sacrifice the tangible benefit of individual choice for the sake of ambiguous benefit of economic development or political change. Based on that, I'm going to talk about two issues in my speech. First of all, even if development is somehow important consideration for developing countries, how we can to some extent achieve that even on this side of the house. Second of all, about individual autonomy. Why developing nations have no right to sacrifice individual autonomy even for the sake of economic development, political change, those sort of things. First of all, about development. So what we heard from that side of the house was that we need to retain human resources in order to change working environment or political issues, those sort of things. We'd like to give you 4 or maybe 5 responses from our side of the house. First of all, we'd like to point out that there's huge problem-solution mismatch coming from that side of the house. If developing nations already recognize the existence of, for example, the problem of working environment or poor working conditions, why not directly tackling that problem to begin with through education about the labor right or the campaign, political campaign, or directly legislate directly pass legislation to improve the working environment, or ask the assistance from international organizations, for example. We think on this side of the house that forcing individuals to stay in that country is very indirect and ambiguous solution whose effectiveness is not guaranteed. But second of all, we think somehow it's very exaggerated scenario coming from their side of the house for them to say that everyone in the developing countries or university graduate in developing countries want to suddenly migrate to developed countries. Because if developing countries really benefit university graduates as they characterize on their side of the house, there will be a reasonable number of people who want to stay in their own original country as doctors, nurses, teachers, or bureaucrats and want to contribute to their own nations. So these people can achieve the kind of social change or the economic development that they want to achieve on their side of the house. But third of all, we think that workability of this proposal is extremely ambiguous because, as the Deputy Prime Minister pointed out in the response to our argumentation, this policy is just about several months, I don't know. But after finishing this period, anyway, those people will migrate to the developed countries according to their characterization. like to that extent, like I don't see like to what extent like this policy will contribute to social change that they want to achieve on their side of the house. Not yet. But first of all, we think that this policy is rather counterproductive to achieve the economic development, those sort of things. Because what likely to happen on their side of the house is individuals who are forced to sacrifice their own autonomy for the sake of their country will accumulate hatred to their own country's government. As leader of the opposition has already told you, like on the other side of the house, people in other developed nations can serve as a channel to bring more business chances to their home country. For example, like the Chinese people in US, thanks to the Chinese people in the US, like Chinese corporations can access to the business chance with US corporations, for example. But those sorts of things will be impossible under their side of the house, because those people will think that developing countries' government is depriving my career opportunity, and because of them I can't achieve my dream, and I don't want to contribute to my home country anymore. Like this is the kind of reaction of the people who are forced to sacrifice their autonomy for the sake of their own country. So even after gaining sufficient skills in developed nations, those people might not go back to original countries, for example, or even if they establish business chance or foreign capital in developed nations, they will not introduce that benefit to the developing countries, and therefore we think taking this policy is rather counterproductive to achieve their goal. So the conclusion of the first crash point, I'll take you later. So conclusion of the first crash point is that the benefits that they want to achieve on their side of the house is extremely ambiguous. Like compared to that, like what we defend on this side of the house, like deprivation of the individual autonomy, is like something that surely happens on our side of the house. And why this is important? Because opening government concedes that tangibility is the criteria that we have to adjudicate this debate. Then, like in terms of tangibility, like our harm is like something that surely happens on the side of the house.
Okay, if you want to defend absolute labor autonomy and labor liberty, do you oppose income tax, withholding taxes, and all labor regulations upon individuals already in the status quo?
I'd like to address that point in the second crash point, but we think on this side of the house that like income tax or those sort of like alternative solution coming from that side of the house is qualitatively different from like this like particular policy. I'd like to further talk about that point in the second crash point. So moving on to the next point about individual autonomy. So basically, like the principal argumentation coming from that side of the house is going to be reciprocal duty or moral duty of individual, those sort of things. But we think this concept of reciprocal duty is extremely generic and ambiguous in this case, because we don't know the benefit that government brings to that individual is so significant to the extent that it justifies the invasion of fundamental human rights to autonomously choose their life work or the place that they live. The analogy coming from closing opposition is progressive tax, and like they said that we already compromise some freedom for the sake of the countries. But progressive tax is just compromisation of property right, which is not so much connected to the autonomous way of living of individuals. Compared to that, this policy restricts job opportunity, which defines you as social beings. Like for example, work requires large commitment of individuals. Individuals have to work for 8 or 10 hours, 5 days a week, and also surrounding people will recognize you based on the occupation. So this is very severely connected to the autonomous way of living of individuals, unlike progressive tax, those sort of things. The response coming from that side of the house was that this is short-term compromisation of individual right, or like they can like accumulate skills even if they work in their own home countries. But even if they serve as nurse, for example, in their original country, for example, instruments that they use for their job is completely different between developing countries and developed countries, and domestic qualification is not sufficiently recognized or valued in developed countries. To that extent, we think that even if it's short-term, still it's very important choice for individuals, and that's why we oppose.
Send your speech. Now let's welcome member of government to start the case of the half debate. Here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Free choice and occupational liberty is not a native endowment. It's not the inalienable right. It is a privilege, ladies and gentlemen, especially in the context of developing country. Rich people and their family intergenerationally monopolize and acquire all the zero-sum resources at the expense of hundreds of thousands of poor people. They are able to enjoy occupational liberty and freedom. we would like to principally undermine the premise of entire opposition case. Ladies and gentlemen, our friends in opening government brilliantly beautifully explained the massive benefit for the entire nation, and the closing opening opposition talked about the harm to individuals. What we'd like to make is a principal comparison between these two phenomena and practicality from the administrative priority perspective. I would like to answer this big question from two perspectives. First of all, why a requirement is justified, why the state has a right to instrumentalize citizens, which directly clashes with open opposition. Secondly, I would like to further explore the idea of reciprocal obligation from the perspective of citizenship and the nature of university as a tertiary educational institution. That is our extension. So let me answer the first question about why requirement is justified. The basic conception and idea is like this. The government in developing country has a right and duty to dismantle exploitative domestic and international economic structure in order to maximize the best utility for vast majority of the citizens inside the nation, thereby has a right to compromise the rights of the most privileged groups in society, and that is why instrumentalization is justified. There are three levels of analysis to support this, which includes the rebuttals to the other side of the house. Number one, the privilegedness of occupational freedom. We are talking about specific types of individual inside the nation. We are talking about specific types of rich family, who are the family of politicians, who are the family of presidents, of companies, or owners, or the relatives of dictators. These are the kind of people who have the ability, the financial and political ability to access tertiary education and to go to university in the first place. So let's make a trade-off between vast majority of poor people who have no resources or capability to even access this kind of education versus limited number of rich people inside the nation who already have monopolized all the wealth intergenerationally. Just because these individuals happen to be born in a rich family, these people automatically have access to good education, resources, or financial ability, which enable them to access this kind of educational course in a society. Therefore, the ability and skill of these individuals are not solely attributed to individual efforts and individuality. These skill and ability, or the equality that these people have, are specially owned and belong to society as a whole, and the existence of fortune and luck. And this is exactly why the progressive taxation is necessary. Even if you work harder, you still have moral obligation to compensate for what you are, compensate for the rest of society who are systematically disenfranchised in this kind of structure. And that is the first principle. I would like, thank you. Moreover, these individuals are historically complicit in perpetuating the structural disparity inside the nation. These rich family or politicians or dictatorship understand that they are the part of this exploitation, but they do nothing about it. Because of this conspiracy or complicity, state has justification to require these individuals to compensate for the downside of complicity. Secondly, domestic poverty and entrenchment. What kind of people are we talking about? The most limited, most privileged types of individuals who have information, expertise, resources. They understand that if they continue their position, then the poverty will be exacerbated. But they actively choose to do nothing about it. They are conducting lobbying in order to circumvent taxation. They are actively accelerate brain drain in order to maximize their capital, their bank account number, right? So this ignorance or negligence is a cause of a perpetuation of poverty. Thereby, these individuals are directly responsible for the pre-existing or ongoing poverty issue inside the nation. Therefore, the state has a right and justification to ask these individuals to compensate for the downside of this negligence and ignorance. No, thank you. Finally, about the historical power imbalance in the global economy. Because of the colonialization in the past, free trade structure is predominant in the global economic structure. Therefore, the disparity between advanced nation and developing nation is entrenched and perpetuated. The monoculture economy is imposed upon developing nations. Therefore, the countries, the vast majority of the workers are like agricultures who have nothing else to do but rely on one single agricultural industry. The limited number of people are abusing or taking advantages of these structures and systematically acquire wealth by taking advantage of this structure. The rich people oftentimes trade with multinational corporations and try to exploit the agricultural workers inside the countries of monoculture industries. For the government perspective, the government has a right and duty to dismantle this exploitative structure and generally accelerate the best form of fairness and utility for all citizens. And that is a justification from the first perspective. Go opening. Hiramoto-kun.
This elite just happens to be born into rich family, and they are not directly responsible for intergenerational injustice, especially given that they are just university graduates. Why is it legitimate to require them to compromise their autonomy?
First of all, foreseeability and predictability. They understand that they have all the information, expertise, and resources, but they actually choose nothing about it. This negligence is a rationale behind the complicity and the conspiracy. Second of all, resource is zero-sum, as I have explained. That is our second argumentation. I will explain, so please wait a little bit benevolently for my speech. So second issue is the reciprocal obligation. So I think Sarah-san referred to the nature of reciprocity, right? I would like to further extend the nature of university as a unique institution inside a nation. University is a unique institution that the most of the budget is spent for. There are not many universities in developing countries, but for the limited number of universities, a lot of budget are spent. Especially, university played a role of research institutions, which in the research for technology, research for the next generation's technology, or like many different kinds of utilities, right? Therefore, university played a role for social utility, not only for individual career planning. The thing here is that those who graduate from university monopolize and dictate all these resources, but abuse these knowledges and expertise for their own careers. And this unique position encourage and the core course of the duty for these individuals. Moreover, ladies and gentlemen, the nation receives some resources at the expense of spending a lot of budget for university. All the other welfares are deprioritized. All the other welfare, medical care, or education for the poor people, or the restriction of child labors, and the basic rudimentary care for the elderly and HIVs, and these all kinds of other benefits are deprioritized because of this kind of structure. Therefore, those who graduate from university have a unique and exclusive obligation to compensate for downside of their privilege, and that is a principal justification we are happy to propose. Thank you.
Then member of government speech. Now let's welcome member of opposition to continue this debate. Please.
I'm very sad to say that now I'm speaking my speech as closing opposition, but right now the debate has only been people talking about the best case scenario in their own cases. OG only talking about the cases where in the situation of those college graduates, they're just gonna be willingly staying in those countries and they're somehow gonna be experienced enough to work and hard enough going to improve the economy. Well, they forgot about the fact that college graduates are the group of people who will initiate social changes because they are the most radical people, they have knowledge and they have ambition. We don't think that if that kind of person doesn't want to stay, you, by forcing them to stay, is going to lead to a very good result. Especially when college graduates, most of us are quite useless at this moment because we need internship. We don't have much experience. How are you going to benefit the society that much just in 2 years without having any kind of training? That's why we think that OG is only in their little own world, while they think that all the college graduates are somehow going to be genius doctors, which is not true, as like our student who is practically useless to say this. And secondly, CG, I have to say, this debate is not about North Korea. Not all the college university graduates are the ones coming from rich families. The people who are so privileged as what they have described are only the top 5% of the society. That's how they can hold that much capital in order to do what they're actually describing. But we are willing to engage in that case in order to tell you why that can actually not be the case. So what CG is trying to prove to us is that brain drain and the economic development is going to not going to be that bad in their case scenario. But notice that this motion only allowed them to stay inside the country for 2 to 3 years. It means that the brain drain will still happen. It's just going to be delayed. If those people are going to be annoyed about their own countries and the economic situation is going to get worse, if those people actually feel that my country is using me like I'm a cow, they're trying to milk everything out of me, then why would I bring anything back to my own country? This is why I believe that the whole government case has failed from the very first beginning. This is the reason why the closing opposition is coming here and trying to engage with all the paradigms by telling you that what is the most likely scenario. And in my speech, I'm going to take like 2 parts. First, I'm going to tell you about the principal justification about why it's never justified for anyone to use any human being as if they are actually some instruments. right? So 3 layers of analysis. First of all, social contract. This directly clash with what closing government have already told us about like how you actually need to pay back to your society. We believe that, okay, if I have already signed a contract with you, for example, I basically signed a contract when I say that I consented to be with you. So even if I say something stupid, I already consented to that. This is something that is due to happen. But because I'm randomly born into the world, I didn't even consent to be born. Of course, I didn't even consent to be born in a certain kind of country. We don't think it is actually legit of you to use social contract as a way to actually kidnap this one person's whole life. And secondly, we believe that the harm is actually very disproportional. What do we mean by this? We think it's okay if one person actually wants to give something for the country, but we believe that this 2 to 3 years is actually very essential to this person's life. Our opponent government have already explained something to this, but we are going to tell you that this 3 years actually matters a lot if you actually think about a person's life, especially when you talk about developing countries. They have different kinds of culture that it matters to achieve when they're actually young. So you are taking away the most useful part of their life and making them feel like they're losing control of themselves. Well, the harm of this particular college graduate, of this like leaving the country, is not going to be that big, right? One person leaving the country is not going to have a huge influence versus the big harm of one person's life basically ruining all the plans. So we believe that the harm is actually disproportional. This is why this is principally unjustifiable right after this. Thirdly, why do we believe that this is actually imposing responsibility on one single individual for something that they have never done, which means that it's actually not justified? My country is not good, it's not my fault, it's the country's fault, it's the government that is not doing a lot of things. And the government is saying that, well, you know, that's kind of your fault because you didn't have education here, so you gotta suffer here, you gotta use your life and try to make things better for me. But why is that you are the one who is irresponsible and I ended up paying your debt using my whole life? This is why it's very principally unjustified and it's going to have tangible harm. It means that the country's identity inside of citizens and for other people are going to be doomed. And I will explain this later on, but before that.
Okay, for developing countries whose governments are often characterized by corruption and lack of internal or organic change, how does progress or at least improvement in labor structures mechanize under your model without pressure or dissatisfaction from the people? Note that pressure is a rather plausible reaction, even if it's not our best case scenario of everyone being ambitious to change the entire society.
Just to explain that this is something that governments that have never proven to you that the whole country's structure is going to be magically better. But I'm going to explain to you how by in our model, natural development, organic change is going to happen when you have more knowledgeable people who are willing to change the country instead of like enslaving those people to stay in your country and work like they're robots, right? So just one more clarification before I actually go on. Because the whole government have been talking about privileged people, right? And they're giving you justification like, well, they're so privileged, they have so much money and power. If that's the case, I believe they can have another passport if they have that much kind of money. They can always get another way to get all of the nation if that's the case. So they are not the main stakeholder, they're not the only stakeholder in today's debate. But who are the other people? As 2 debaters coming from developing nations who graduated, gonna graduate from universities, we're gonna tell you that the majority of those people are middle class people, are poor students who can suffer through like a Gaokao system. It means that you got to compete with millions and billions of people, and then you go into the top universities, and then the government is saying that, well, you know, you can do this because of your family. Well, my family didn't really do much about this. So I'm going to do a comparison of the 2 worlds about what is really going to happen. In the world of government, right? Let's just say that they took 1 year of internship of some doctors and they finally grow this person into a workable doctor. You don't want your doctor to do your surgery to be a college graduate, trust me. This is the reason why after 2 to 3 years, that person who still wants to leave the nation will definitely leave the nation. So brain drain happens. And then what happens is you actually use your country's resources in terms of growing this person to be capable enough in order to work. You ended up wasting your resources and then you people actually run away. And then those people are actually sad about what is going on. But in our world, how is this going to make it better, right? If a person actually chooses to leave the country, trust me, the decision is not easy. The whole family, the friends, the culture, everything actually left over in the country. This is why even when people go, they will still have love for their family and for the places they actually came from. This is why in Rwanda, those people who left Rwanda actually created the biggest power in their economy. They're still giving billions of dollars back into their country. They want to rebuild this kind of system. When money flows in, people definitely have more need because now they have more money. You will end up creating more market and you will end up like getting more foreign direct investment because now your market is actually flowing and people have more money to consume. This is why everything is going to start flowing. And when everyone actually have more capability in terms of purchasing, the political structure is going to get better because people have more time and their brain can finally function to think. This is the reason why in our side of the house, everything is going to get better. But in the government side of the house, the people who got stuck in the country will just blame the birth lottery and try to get a better life in the next life, but they don't have much incentive in solving the problem since their country is such a bad place that only want to get things, all of them. We're here to tell you that people actually matter. You should give them the choices. And if you do so, we believe that the better situation can only happen in our side of the house. This is why we are super proud to oppose.
Thank you, member of opposition speech. Now let's welcome Government and the Council for Government here.
So, ladies and gentlemen, two things to be talked in my speech. Number one, direct engagement to CEO, and number two, justification of this motion. Okay, so first one, direct engagement to CEO. So the closing opposition said they said, not every college graduates are super rich, but that is not true. We expect like at least from 1 to 5% of the population are relatively rich family, and we assume. Okay, and they said like 2 years is not enough for making a social change, but we are happy to if they stay more than 2 years. And at least several years we do care to those college graduates to stay in their country and help the nation. No, thank you. So they say like the government is imposing responsibility on the individuals, but we say like the government. Like tax, governments share responsibility with everyone, and those tax money can help the nation. Those college graduates should help the country to develop their own country. So it is totally justifiable to to share the responsibility of the nation's development with those elites class, like college graduates. Well, thank you. Okay. So, and another thing they said is there are vast majority of middle class, but even if middle class the has responsibility on poor people because wealth is a relative thing, and we have to save those vulnerable poor people. We have those responsibility to save these poor people, and that's why we should implement this motion. Okay. So let me move my no, thank you. So let me move on my to second thrust point, the principle. Okay. So nation citizens should return what they are given from their countries. In this debate, what we are talking about is the elite citizens of the country. So they are at the height of the development of the country, and that development country's social ladder, because they are the graduates from the university, and they are at the highest educational organization of the country. No, thank you. Okay, we say it is totally justifiable, and this is a very balanced policy to ask the university graduates work for their country. Why is that so? Because the nation invested a lot of amount of money on those elites and made who they are, and that's why they have the obligation to pay back, to pay what they are, the country given to themselves, to the country. So in developing countries, on the other hand, there are so many vulnerable people suffering from poverty, unclean sanitation environment, lack of medicine, etc. So that is why those university graduates have duty
First of all, for the sake of saving people in their own country. What happens if they won't work for their own country? As they leave their own country and enjoy their freedom of choice, individual autonomy, those who are suffering keep suffering very, very long time because they spend because without development. So they are the ones who keep suffering, and we have to save those poor people from that miserable condition. Okay, go.
Why individuals have to take responsibility for the failure of the government or something that they cannot control by themselves, such as colonization or the poor allocation of national budget?
Okay, because as my honorable partner and I have been telling you that because those elites have obligation to pay back what they have given to their own country, and that it is like it is the same structure like progressive tax or conscription. We are not saying like we keep that kind of elite in that country forever, but ask them to like minimum period of time for their own country and contribute to the development of that country. So that's why it is totally justifiable, we think. So if they stay in their own country after graduation, as doctors they can save so many people's lives in their own country. As leaders of the government, they can make the development plan for their own country. As politicians, they can, as scientists, they can contribute to the development of agriculture or save people from food shortage. Or as economists, they can contribute to economic growth of their own country. So, and as educators, they can raise many more younger generation to support their own country. So that's why we think it is totally justifiable to ask them to stay in their own country and work for their country's development. So for those reasons, we are happy to propose.
Here, here.
Let's welcome opposition week to end the opposition case and as well as this debate.
Here, here.
I haven't seen it. This debate has been extremely lacking of weighing. So me as the op-with will just do some weighing in this debate on three issues. First, justification. Second, the like the foreign money and those kind of stuff. Then thirdly, social change. First, on the biggest issue, which is justification. We think if we can prove that our side is winning on this motion, we probably already get this debate. Let's take a look at the principal framework that they both open government and closing government talk about. First, open government. The justification and the only criteria that the open government talk about is intangible and immediate harm and severe harm. As long as they can disprove this, I guess we win on the justification. Why it's untrue, right? My partner had provided to you. First, university graduates are quite useless, right? You cannot expect a university graduate to actually operate as an operator is a doctor. You cannot expect people who be already very experienced and be qualified enough to do medical conduction. For university graduates in bio and chemistry field, they are just like troublemakers that no one likes. Professors are hating them, stuff like that. And secondly,
a great proportion of people are not actually going to generate that much of utility. For example, people from the field of art, literature, they probably are not going to generate immediate utility to the society. Secondly, even if for people who are at medical major and things like that, which is already a minority portion of the demographic, the thing is this, right? In underdeveloped or developing country, their industry are extremely poorly developed, which means they're not going to be able to find jobs that are very proper. That is the fundamental reason why bio students have the least employment rate in developing countries, right? There's no such job that fit their major. By giving that, they have proved that on overall weighting, is the portion that can actually generate immediate change is really, really small, which means on their side, in order to justify this blanket policy, they need to weigh whether it's okay to sacrifice the great majority of people's freedom, or it's okay to do this blanket policy just like because we want some unexperienced doctor to cause trouble. I think this comparison is clear enough. Then let's talk about the North Korea case in the closing government. I get all of the analysis very fair, but there are several issues, right? First, if it's really that kind of North Korea case, there's no changes in both paradigms. Even if you force them to stay at the country, it will be even rather counterproductive because those rich people, privileged people, if they stay at the country, they're going to be assigned to be the head of a certain company, so they get good CV, then after 2 or 3 years, they will go to some other foreign company to work. Which means, in the end of the day, you rather occupy more domestic resources, right? You do not get the any kind of benefit on your side. And in addition, probably those people who are already privileged, even they graduate from the best university, maybe they're like not very good student, right? They probably like get through the good university because of their like shadow connection and stuff. Go.
Okay, so you said that 2 years are insufficient to forward change. Of course, at the individual level optics, that may be short, but at the entire social level, even if individuals leave after 2 years, our mechanism is that the critical mass is continuously replenished by thousands of newly emerging university graduates every year that maintain the workforce and the momentum of pressure against the government. If you say that university graduates are a useless workforce,
I will get to
then
the
you're
point on my
unsuccessful.
third issue. Okay, then let's continue on the principle. There are other scattered principles on the closing government. Closing government also mentioned reciprocity, which is like responded by my partner's analysis on why this social contract is arbitrary and do not have binding power, right? They use examples such as military services and whatnot, but they didn't explain why this can also apply to this issue where we have this way in telling you that this blanket policy is something that causes disproportional burden on individuals. And secondly, a moral obligation, right? I guess their moral obligation and their consequence of this argument is fundamentally contingent upon are they going to predict that if they stay, they will get better outcome for the country, which we believe is not the case, right? Because if it's in their paradigm, if they stay, probably the country won't change that much because it's a horrible situation of dictatorship and things like that, right? Then moving on to the next point of remittances, right? The opening government says, oh, it will be unregulated. Yeah, probably yes, to some extent. Then the opening opposition kind of now grant this case, there were people sending back money. But why are they likely to send back money, and to what extent this money will bring social changes is the exclusive contribution of my partner. My partner told you two things, right? First is the psychological analysis of why those people are likely to send money back to their country. Then secondly is the empirical evidence of how in Rwanda, the foreign remittance actually became a fundamental pillar of the country's economy. The subsequent effect of that is things like you have more domestic in demand, you have more needs for goods and services, which means you also become more attractive to foreign investment and things like that, which means it's create a better room for people to get out of poverty and to think. Go.
Okay, so we agree.
So rather than rely on benevolence or like kindness of individual, it's much better or reasonable for government to prioritize concrete utility.
This exists on comparison, right? Because how are you, like, how these people are going to be like really contributing to that extent, because we have already proven to you that given that domestic industry is really poorly developed, they cannot fully use their ability, right? Which means they're not going to make a large amount of money to contribute back to the society. So, continuing, right? The last point is about social change, which is connected to the economic development. The opening argument says which is logically true, that if you show people the problem, people will probably have incentive to change that. But to how likely is the change was never mentioned by the opening government, right? But our economic extension have proven to you, now we create ground for people to actually care about stuff, right? When people are in debt poverty, they don't care about whether my right is protected or whatnot. I don't care about whether there's labor protection, there's insurance or whatnot. I think in conclusion, we are the side that have better possibility for people to realize that they need changes and have better pressure to forward these changes. For all this reason, proud to vote.